breath you take, every move you make, every bond you break, I'll be watching you.
I'm a nurse who works the night shift. There have been 2 occasions when I have been stalked on my way home. I'd like to share them with you. This happened when I lived in Chikawa, Tokyo. I was returning home on the last train of the night. It was around 12:30 a.m. When you get off the train and exit the subway, there is a convenience store at the top of the stairs. My apartment at the time was about 7 minutes away from this store in a residential area. At that time of night, when you get off the last train home, the lights of the convenience store are pretty much the only light source in the area. The roads are usually empty too. Back to the story. I was climbing up the subway stairs and I noticed a man waiting at the top of the stairs, staring at me. He kept widening his eyes as he stared at me. He was shifting around restlessly. At that moment, I knew the guy was weird. I ignored the traffic lights and crossed the road. I took a quick look over my shoulder and decided to quickly walk home since the situation was a bit creepy. As I was walking, I felt a presence behind me. I looked over my shoulder and noticed that the weird guy from the subway was following me, and he was closing the distance between us. Without any hesitation or thought, I instinctively started running. I remember running like crazy. I was so panicked and frightened. There was no one on the streets to help me, no cars passing by, and it was so dark. I ran up a path into someone's private garden, pushed the gate aside and hid there. I crept around the back of the house. It looked over a road and I saw a taxi passing by and I saw my chance. The taxi driver must have seen how desperate I was and slowed down and saved me that night. After this event, I moved to an apartment right in front of a different train station. This area seemed much safer as it had a 24-hour taxi rank, buses, it was well lit and it was busy with people even at night. It was reassuring. I had been living in my new place for about 2 years when something else happened to me. Of course, it took place when I was coming home from my night shift. In those days when I left the hospital to go home, I used to take a shortcut through a dark alley. It was there that I am certain that I met the same man again. I quickly headed to the train station. I boarded my train and saw him again as I sat down. The man was staring at me. He must have followed me onto the train. I had a terrible feeling about this. He kept glancing at me and fidgeting in his seat. The train pulled into my station. I got as close as I could to the doors, and as soon as they opened, I ran as fast as I could. I ran to an exit that I knew to be busy. I took off my jacket and tried to blend into the crowds of people. When I found a safe place to hide, I looked over my shoulder. He was there, desperately searching the area. I knew how much danger I was in. Luckily, there was a police box at the west exit of the station. In the following days, I became paranoid that the man might know where I live, or be waiting to ambush me next time I got off at the station. I told the police everything I could about the man. One of the officers seemed to know the man I was speaking of, and described him as perverted. When he said that, shivers went down my spine. There are lots of young nurses in Japan who work late like I did back then. It's 10 years on, and I still get creeped out thinking about it. As peaceful as Japan is, be careful while walking home at night.
This happened when I was in elementary school. I remember it was around the time that the NES had just come out. Yeah, I know I'm old. Back then there was this older kid in the neighborhood. He was in university. My mum likes him. He was a serious kind of guy, very intense. He was into his studies, He was a good student. My mum wanted him to tutor me. He was actually really nice to me. He used to let me play on his NES after studies. Back then it was all the rage. I felt lucky. Thinking back on it, I was like half his age, and I'm pretty sure I was annoying too. He was always super patient with me. He was always kind enough to let me play for as long as I felt like. I loved having him as a tutor. But this all kind of changed after about half a year. He started acting differently. As soon as our studies finished, he wouldn't be so interested in playing the NES anymore, or even watching me play. He was glued to his phone. He wouldn't be without it. It was before smartphones. He was just using a standard house phone. He never spoke on the phone, but he was always dialing, hanging up and redialing. He always held the handset to his ear, but he never said a word. Hang up, dial again, repeat. It went on and on. It was intense. In the past he used to joke around and stuff, but that all went out the window in the last few months. Things got a bit weird. I didn't like hanging out with him as much as I used to. Why was he doing that, I wondered. I didn't understand it at the time. He would do it again and again. He obviously knew the number off by heart. It went on like this for a while. And eventually I told my mum that he was freaking me out. Plus around this time, one of my friends at school got a NES. I could play around his house without being weirded out. One day my mum told me that I wouldn't be studying with him anymore. And I was really happy. I didn't ask why, I just went with it. I think she said he was too busy with university work to tutor me. Something like that. A few months later, I learned the truth. I saw my former friend and tutor on TV. Now I remember this as if it was yesterday. He was on the news. He killed a woman. I found out afterwards that he was in love with another university student. He harassed her from morning to night. He was obsessed with her, and he eventually killed her when she realized she didn't feel the same way about him. What I was witnessing at my young age was a stalker calling his victim. If I was older, I might have realized what the constant silent calls meant. And I still blame myself for not helping to prevent that woman's death.
This happened when I was a student. When I was at university, I was in a club with this girl who was a year younger than me. She really liked me back then. She was a nice girl, very popular too. One day she confessed her love to me. I liked another girl, so I politely refused her advances. She got really angry, like she was shocked that I refused her. Due to her reaction, I quit going to the same club we met at. Life went on and we were getting ready to graduate, so my attention turned to job hunting. I graduated and didn't see her again. Well, the truth is I did my best to avoid her. I managed to get a job working in Tokyo. I started living alone. It was great. After about 3 months or so, I came back from work about midnight. I was trying to make a name for myself, so I was putting in as many hours as I could. I checked my mailbox and I found a letter. It didn't have a stamp on it. I opened it and it was a letter from her, the girl who liked me that I met at the club. Lots of old memories from university days came up. I was quite nostalgic. It said, "I still can't forget about you." It was written like she was angry when she wrote it. It went on to say, "I had a hard time finding this place. I came all this way to see you, but you weren't home. You really disappointed me." This was especially creepy since I hadn't given out my address to anyone besides my parents at that time. I turned to the next page. There was a drawing of what looked like she and I holding hands. I looked at the drawing and we were smiling and gazing deeply into each other's eyes. It was an expertly well-drawn piece of art, but fucking creepy. To draw this well just from imagination amazed me. She had talent. I looked at her hair. It was lifelike. I touched it and it was real. Real hair, glued to the paper. She had glued each strand of hair so carefully to the paper at first glance it looked as if it was drawn. If I had to hazard a guess, I would say it was her hair. I'm in the process of moving, but even if I move, I wonder if she would track me down again. I have been thinking about what would have happened if I was home that night. It really creeps me out. I keep checking my doors and windows are shut and locked, but these days I am a bit freaked out every time I leave the house. I wear a face mask just in case she is out there. She might not recognize me instantly. I will let you guys know if anything else happens. Note: there have been no further posts. I hope we can assume that nothing further happened.
A long time ago, my dad was seeing another woman behind my mum's back. A few years later, he decided to break it off with his mistress. This caused her to become mentally unstable. My sisters and I would occasionally see her stood on the road near our school, acting strange. She frightened us. My sisters were able to ignore her with ease, but I somehow felt sorry for her. She spoke to me occasionally, and when my sisters weren't there, I would always reply. After a while, she would say things like, "You're such a good girl. You're the best out of your sisters." One day, to my surprise, she gave me a Jenny doll. I was overjoyed. Since I am the youngest of my siblings, I would always get their hand-me-downs. I never had something new, something of my very own. Now this wasn't some old tattered doll, no. This was a brand new Jenny doll, just for me. I didn't want my sisters to get their hands on my new doll and take her for their own. Furthermore, I was sure that they would tell on me and Mum and Dad would take Jenny away. I decided not to tell them about the doll. But because my father's mistress was mentally unstable, she didn't really care what kind of trouble she caused me. She became obsessive. She tried to give me a huge amount of Jenny products. A hair salon, a playhouse, 7 more Jenny dolls. Every day she would be waiting for me on the way to school. It was all too much, and her behavior scared me. So I began to avoid her. I changed my route. After a while, she stopped waiting for me on the way to school. And eventually, I went back to walking my usual route to school again. I was happy. But one morning, I saw her again. I didn't feel the usual kindness she had projected before. Something had changed. She was very calm and still. Totally the opposite of how she had been before. Her face was pale, and her smile was now thin. I couldn't really see much of her face, as it was hidden beneath the brim of her big hat and sunglasses. She was carrying 2 huge overnight bags by her side. In one of the bags, a box was poking out, somewhat intentionally. Immediately I recognized the box's shape. I was sure that it was a Jenny doll box. "I have to go away. I'm going far away. Please accept this as a parting gift," she said as she offered the box to me. It was a Jenny doll, one that I hadn't seen before. It was a Jenny with long black hair. I hurried along to school. I was so eager to show everyone my rare new Jenny. Honestly, I couldn't wait to start boasting. Some horrid boy snatched the box from me at school. He tore it open and pulled my new rare Jenny's head off. I was mortified. Some of the girls at school managed to get Jenny back from the boy, and they returned her to me. I held her head in my hands, and I saw weed-like clumps of someone's black hair jutting from beneath her chin. It didn't look right. One of the girls who returned the doll pinched a clump of the hair. At first, a huge curled-up wad of hair came out, followed by long, trailing strands. We watched as the hair from Jenny's scalp slowly started to become unraveled. A crowd of children gathered round to get a closer look. Hair from her head was disappearing from the scalp as the girl tugged on the clump of hair. Someone noticed small blood clots attached to the roots of the hair. It was definitely human hair. But this wasn't hair that was cut, but hair that was torn from someone's head. We all stared at the doll. Suddenly, we were all screaming in horror. I felt so scared and so bad inside, I was revolted. I began to cry. Others around me were crying too, even the boy who ripped Jenny's head off. We were inconsolable. The teachers had to cancel our following lesson. The teachers called an assembly, and we were all given a serious talk about that incident. We were reminded of the importance of not receiving gifts from strangers, and to be aware of perverts. I was made to state before my teachers and my parents, who were called in from work, I will not take things from strangers, and I will be careful of perverts. Neither my parents nor teachers would say that the pervert was my father's ex-mistress. It was just a word used to distance us all from my father's personal situation. To this day, whenever I see a Jenny doll, I feel sick and frightened, especially the new ones with black hair.
This happened around 3 years ago. I still get goosebumps when I think about it. It was about 9 o'clock. I had just gotten home from a hard day of work when my doorbell rang. I sighed and looked through the peephole of the door. A woman in her late 30s was stood there. I thought, oh great, this must be some religious solicitation, door-to-door salesman or something like that. Something I wasn't in a mood for sure. Yes? I said as I opened the door a couple of inches. Excuse me, but is this Mr. Kimura's house? She asked politely. Yeah, that was my name. It said it on my postbox, so anyone could have read it in the lobby. But I was still a bit surprised. I was tired and I couldn't be bothered to deal with her, so I replied, No, sorry, no Mr. Kimura here. I'm afraid you have the wrong place. I began to close the door. The woman pushed against the door before it shut, looked me in the eyes and said, Are you being honest with me? It's you, isn't it? Don't try and hide from me, Mr. Kimura. She screamed the last part as she pushed as hard as she could on the door. I was in shock. She was now in my apartment. I was in panic mode. I remember just saying no, 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 no. I regained some composure and I pushed her back towards the door. Get off me! I know it's you, Mr. Kimura! Mr. Kimura, it's you! I found you! She called out. It was getting more and more escalated. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I didn't know what to do. I shouted, If you don't get out, I'm going to call the police. The woman went silent, glared at me with a puzzled look, and turned and left my apartment without any more drama. I double-checked the door was locked and the chain was on, and after much stressing out and worrying, I eventually went to bed. As you might have guessed, I didn't get much sleep that night. The next day, on my way home, I saw a younger woman waiting in an alley, in a kind of a blind spot. She looked to be a high school student. Since she looked a bit like the woman from last night, I guessed it was her daughter. I thought for a second that I was getting paranoid, until she noticed me and started running towards me. She began shouting, "Mr. Kimura, I've wanted to meet you for so long." She had something in her hand. I think it was a small fruit knife. She was shouting and running at me with a knife in her hand. It was horrifying. Thankfully, I wasn't too far from my apartment. I ran in and locked the door. "Mr. Kimura, come outside. Come outside, Mr. Kimura. If you don't come out, I'll kill you." I frantically dialed the police. The phone was ringing as I dashed around my apartment, checking my windows were locked and the curtains were closed. I flipped off the lights too. The police answered and I explained the situation in a panicked voice. They tried to calm me down. They said that they are sending someone and they will be there in about 2 minutes. They asked me to make sure all the doors are locked. As I got to the window, I could see the daughter trying to climb up the wall to get to the window, while the mother smiled and stared at me from below in my garden. I saw that she was looking around the garden for something before I closed the curtains. My guess is that she was looking for a rock or something to smash my window. Something was banging against the window. I guess the girl had managed to reach it. She was screaming, "Mr. Kimura, I want to meet you." I was cowering in the bathroom. I frantically searched for a weapon to defend myself with, and all that was available was my toilet brush. I was gripping the handle tightly, with my back against the wall, shivering with fear. After about 5 minutes, "Oi, what are you doing?" It was a new voice, a male voice. Could it be a police officer? It sounded like a police officer. I heard my doorbell ringing. "Mr. Kimura, this is the police. Are you okay?" I felt an awesome sense of relief wash over me. I went with them to the police station. I wanted to find out why these horrible incidences had happened to me. I wanted an explanation. The police confirmed that the woman was under arrest. It transpires that she had committed the same crimes against another Mr. Kimura. I was also informed that her daughter is now living with another family member. I don't know which Mr. Kimura they were looking for, or what he did to them. I had never seen her before. It worries me to think that one day they might come back. I have thought about changing my name. Of course, I moved house after this. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. A huge thank you to my friend Jay Nightmares for joining me on this one. If you haven't already, please go and check out his channel. He actually translates stories from Japan into English and narrates them on his channel. It'd be great if we could get him to 1,000 subscribers. He really does deserve it. And of course, thank you to all of those who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it so much. And remember,
Papa loves you.